in the last comment I was discussing, in the previous comment, I was discussing how the ancient mariner, in a sense, set himself up to be won by life and death. And of course, his unreflective action, not considering the consequences of shooting the albatross, just his indifference to other life, to any of God's creatures. And I think this is one of the ways in which Coleridge's Christianity enters the picture. It's a form of sin to deny the soul, the spirit, in other of God's creatures. To simply shoot something, to kill it for no reason, to kill it, just out of malcontent, boredom, whatever. This is the type of action that comes from life and death, unmotivated violence, no real sense of something else having feelings or meaning. It's almost narcissistic or sociopathic, to use some of our terms, to use some of the terms that we throw around today. But this culture of narcissism, of lack of empathy, is, I think, characteristic of what Coleridge is talking about in Life and Death. So what the ancient mariner has to do in order to find redemption in a Christian sense for Coleridge is to come to some awareness of just what he has done and to atone for his sin, to repent of his sin, and then through the grace of God be freed from that sin. And that's really what happens in part 4. There's an internal change, a moment of grace for the ancient mariner. And it comes at a point in which he's stuck on the ship. He's the only one left. All the other sailors have died and been taken by death. So he's alone on this ocean, alone from himself, alone from any kind of universal spirit, alone from God. He's in kind of an existential solitude, trying to make some meaning of this situation. And that's the moment at which God's grace, here in a Christian sense, enters. For Wordsworth, it might have been the universal spirit. In Tintern Abbey, for Coleridge, it's more a Christian God, and that's why I think we've got all these crossbows, crossings, a cross, motif working through the entire poem, is to underscore this Christian message that God's grace comes as a result of the sacrifice of his Son on the cross and allowing his creatures to be redeemed through faith and good action, through living a life not of life and death, but a life of life with spirit, with meaning, with faith. The poem, the moment at which this happens is earlier in the poem. Earlier in the poem, the ancient mariner had looked off the deck and seen these slimy things on a slimy sea. This is this moment where he's completely alienated from his environment, from other creatures. He's got this albatross dead albatross hanging around. He's got this dead albatross hanging around his neck. He's got this dead albatross hanging around his neck, so he's certainly not very amenable to the water snakes or these slimy things that are slipping around outside the boat. He just finds them grotesque, I guess the way some people find mice or rats or spiders or snakes. He has this kind of dismisses them. And in fact, he's dismissing the water snakes, these slimy things, as he says earlier, the same way he dismissed the spirit, the soul that was in the albatross, a fellow creature. However, at the end of part 4, he has his moment of grace because instead of seeing slimy things, suddenly he sees water snakes. And they're incredibly beautiful. And Coleridge, in an almost psychedelic description, discusses how the snakes come out of the water and hoary flakes fall off of them, almost like scales. So, something like a psychedelic image there, where these pieces of light are almost falling off the animals as they rise out of the water, almost, hypnotically. He says, beyond the shadow of the ship, I watched the water snakes. They moved in tracks of shining white, and when they reared, the elfish light fell off in hoary flakes. I guess the opium was working for him at that point, for Coleridge, that is. Within the shadow of the ship, I watched their rich attire, their rich clothing, so to speak. Blue, glossy green, and velvet black. They coiled and swam, and every track was a flash of golden fire. Here's this moment of redemption, and redemption not through some logical argument as to the existence of God or some rationalist argument about the nature of human knowledge. This is a transcendent moment in which the ancient mariner feels communion with these snakes, the same way that Coleridge, the same way that Wordsworth felt a communion looking over the natural beauty of Tintern Abbey. It's an overwhelming experience. It's something that takes him out of himself, takes him out of life and death, that everyday mundane sense of life, into something incredibly meaningful, powerful, authentic, identity creating. Then there's a great stanza after that. This is the second to last stanza in part 4. Penultimate stanza. Oh, happy living things, no tongue their beauty. Oh, happy living things, no tongue their beauty might declare. So it's something beyond words, beyond the poor power of words to describe. Words are not the be-all and end-all of thought and creation and knowledge. They're a rough guide. A spring of love gushed from my heart, and I blessed them unaware. Sure, my kind saint took pity on me, and I blessed them unaware. So from somewhere, from within himself, this spring of love appears. Compassion, connection, the exact opposite of life and death. He's connected to the natural world for the first time in the poem. Instead of shooting albatrosses and wearing dead albatrosses about his neck and complaining about slimy things, now he suddenly sees the beauty in it. And it's interesting that it's an aesthetic, emotional reaction, the apprehension of beauty, that leads him to this emotional change.